Okay, hi everybody. My name is Stephanie Kraft and I'm here with Adam Sanchez.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching.
So this is our next video in our Narcissism series. This video is about how to respond to narcissism and deeper insights. And the deeper insights is what Adam is about to read. He did a writing on his path and journey through this experience and healing through this experience and more awareness that he's brought into what is involved in this type of dynamic. So Adam, why don't you go ahead and begin your reading?
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, I'd love to. I spent much of my life alone, and even though I've also been blessed to experience love and connection, I have also experienced, in at least equal measure, or perhaps more, senses of isolation and hopelessness, and a true test to my belief and own state of humanity. I was probably about 5 to 7 years old when I first started to recognize that I had a fear of people, though I didn't understand exactly why at that time. I felt so alone that I thought the only way for me to feel better was to take my own life. Isolation is one of the most painful things a human being can experience because innately our hearts know that we are meant to be connected. But often the slings and arrows of life's experience and the challenges in our relationships or communications can leave us feeling wanting and even yearning, especially when we experience more pain than connection. The thing about pain is that it can actually be dangerous and even contagious, particularly when we have been systematically programmed to bypass, deny, and ignore pain within ourselves, our own psyche, and society at large. This is what I was only subconsciously present to at that first time I wanted to check out of life. I was aware of my own pain and how it was growing, particularly through my interactions with people, their rejections, judgments, and even projections, though I had no idea then, in my newly developing mind, what that truly was. I was also keenly aware of the pain within people and their ability and tendency to disown or displace that pain out into their environment or onto people nearby. This also meant that I was aware of the occurrence of my own pain from the subverted pain of others, which grew into an ever-expanding fear of people, leading me to willingly start to separate, distance, and disconnect myself from even more from others, despite the fact that deep in my heart, I longed to be closer to them more than anything. When I discovered at 30 years old that I had been slowly growing cancer in my body the whole time, and that it had culminated in stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, I had done enough psychospiritual work to know that my emotions were connected to this manifestation. And at that time, I voraciously learned all I could and uncovered the awareness that food and nutrition are also deeply related to emotion and healing. So I managed to reverse that dis-ease in my body simply by practicing greater levels of self-love and care as expressed through a healthy relationship to food and nourishment. Despite the staggering simplicity of this powerful perspective, it left me more isolated than ever because most people couldn't relate to or fathom such a reality, to the point where even the closest people in my life vilified me instead of supporting me. And so my fear of people took on a whole new depth. It was at this time that I started to see beyond the surface of things and realize that something was profoundly wrong. And not with myself as I had feared or imagined for most of my life, but with the world and its operating systems themselves. That the common person or belief would be so devoid of compassion or so ungrounded in reality left me stunned. I found myself doubting every single connection I had ever had, and even doubting the existence of love itself. I saw each and every single person's capacity, including my own, for fear, hate, projection, envy, and darkness. I saw everyone relating to life and the world from the shadows and their own perceptions projected from pain. which explained why they couldn't see my own pain or anyone else's, and only added to it when it was presented to them 9 times out of 10. This mechanism of denying one's own pain and projecting it, thereby perpetuating it out into the world, is the fundamental mechanism of this systemic, parasitic psyche, which I call the Narcissistem. It especially loves to bypass the pain of others and marginalize it, diminish it, or even go as far as victim blaming and character assassinations of those who have actually been subject to its abuses. And yet, the main thing that I've come to discover about this pervasive problem is that it actually isn't personal at all. It is the most, by definition, impersonalized and generalized system of pain. It is simply a mechanism, a rogue mindset or belief system that just doesn't serve because it is based on illusions and half-truths and lies. Namely, the illusion that our pain or power exists out in the world, is separate from ourselves, and that others are the source of it. The real issue is that we have pain within that we have denied or diverted to levels of our unconsciousness. And so it is easy to remain more comfortably unaware, conveniently pointing the finger externally, when really what's needed is to reflect within. This is also paradoxically distinct from being able to hold other people accountable for causing others pain. If we bypass our own pain, we are more likely to allow other people to bypass their pain through us. This is how the Narcissistem tries to exact its control over everyone and everything, using fear to corral and control. Fear is a source of the need/desire to control, and the greatest fear in the narcissistic mindset is that we will lose control of our own pain and be consumed by it, ultimately resulting in our own annihilation. If we can see that we need no saviors externally, then we can realize that the only authority that we need to submit to is the authority of our own truth, of heart, and the spark of divine awareness within. Once we fall into the blame and shame categories around pain, we immediately give up our power and abdicate our sovereignty of the true knowing that we are the creators of our own destiny, perception, and life experiences. When we can be accountable to our own pain first, we are free to hold others accountable to their pain as well. The tricky part is that most people are not willing to accept this level of truth about their own pain or accept responsibility or accountability for their life experience. Whether it be because the Narcissistem has programmed people so thoroughly that they believe every one of its lies, the biggest being that power or truth exists somewhere externally, or that this may be the single greatest weakness of human nature. The truth is, we can navigate through our own life experience by recognizing the people who are caught up in this system are not working with a vibration of love and are instead caught up in the loops of fear. This is not about judging another's path, for where everyone is, whenever they are there, is divinely appropriate for them and their free will choice. But the thing that I'm finally learning now, after confronting years worth of my fears of people, connection, and relationship, is that what's most important is staying centered in the knowing that I am indeed connected to the divine and all others, especially those that recognize that truth in themselves as well. Those are the people to align with and greater manifest my own life purpose of connection and oneness, thereby busting the Narcissistem. And anyone who is holding an intention or agenda that is outside of or against this is not a person for me. I no longer have to be afraid of the darkness or gaslighting or sabotage of those stuck in their own narcissism or how they project that onto me. I know who I am, and most importantly, who I choose to be. Sending all agents of the Narcissistem love, blessings, and even gratitude for teaching me the value of the true divinity within me. May we all awaken to both the light and the dark inside of us and choose consciously who we wish to be. So thank you for letting me share that, because it's been a very deeply personal experience for me, and just allowing myself essentially to love myself despite all the messages of the world that tell me that I'm not worthy of that, right? Because mostly of their own projected stuff that really has nothing to do with me. So I had to disconnect from the fallacies and the lies and get to that truth within, which I think really is self-love. Comes down to that.
I would agree. That was so beautiful and poignant. I'm
Thank
really
you.
glad that you read that, so that everybody could hear it and ponder the depth of all that's entailed. And let's definitely talk about self-love. So you and I were chatting just before about that we feel that to begin the process of distancing oneself from a narcissist, we really have to begin with self-love. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We've talked so much about this in our private time, and also, professionally, publicly with these videos. And there's so many great things that we can do, and we're going to go over some of those things here today. But I think you could say it's almost like a panacea, right? I mean, the spiritual teachings do teach us that love is the greatest force in the universe. And, whether you subscribe to that or not, may be a personal choice, which I think it really does come down to choice. But that's the thing, right? If it's as simple as choosing love, well, it's worthy of exploration at the very least, right? So what does that mean in a practical sense? Well, if we're faced with a narcissistic scenario, it's ironic, because the idea of narcissism is that Narcissus, this ancient Greek story about, the flower, the Narcissus flower, was named after this person who ended up falling in love with himself and his reflection in a pond. And it was self-love gone, haywire, basically, right? But it's an illusion in itself, that story, because it's not a true self-love where you get so stuck in yourself. That's the false self-love, actually, that we are disconnecting from and deconstructing in these videos. Because true self-love recognizes that you are actually connected to other beings as well. You're not stuck in the small individual me self. You're connected to this larger sense of self that recognizes it's not just about me, right? So when you actually have self-love and you actually experience or choose self-love, it benefits you as well as the environment, and is not an expression of narcissism. So in the case of getting involved with a narcissist, I think it's safe to say that narcissists categorically don't have self-love, which is why they seek it so extensively from outside sources, right? Because they're not connected to that source within. But in a sense, of us all being connected, that's kind of how the narcissist can reflect that part of us back to ourselves, that part of us that is seeking for the love and the validation from externals, in this case, from the narcissist, him or herself, right? So if you find yourself, an empath, or you find yourself attracting a lot of narcissists in your experience, the main issue may just be that you're not loving yourself as much as you need to or could be, and you're attaching that sense of self-love on the narcissist externally because they're so magnetic, because they're so charismatic, because they seem to be such a source of that love. So instead of going through all the other stuff that we can go through, and we're going to talk about those other steps momentarily, I think at the core, the simplest thing that we can do to actively, energetically, emotionally, and very even viscerally, physically shift the dynamic for ourselves is to take away that focus from the external, in this case, the narcissist, and bring it to ourselves and say, okay, how can I love myself more in this moment? What is it I need right now that I can give myself that maybe I was hoping to get from this other person, but the issue is they're clearly not going to give it, right? That's how we're starting to see that this isn't a balanced relationship, because our needs aren't getting met in that relationship. So it's up to us to go within to our own relationship with ourselves and fill that gap. And I think self-love is the key.
I agree. And I want to talk a little bit about what self-love really is, because we tend to think of love as an emotion or a feeling. And it's self-love is not really just only a feeling, it's actually action. The way that you demonstrate self-love is through your actions. So it's about your habits, you know, your eating habits, your exercise, your sleep, getting enough sleep, taking care of your physical body in the utmost, you know, best possible way that you can, rather than depriving yourself, you know, going to bed too late, not getting enough sleep, not exercising, not eating the right foods. This is showing yourself a lack of self-love. It might sound unrelated, but it's completely related, because once you start to take actions that are self-loving, you're showing yourself love. And so it isn't about looking in the mirror and looking into your eyes and saying, I love you. I mean, you can do that to build it up if it's really not there at any level. But, so it's not so much as cultivating this feeling within, it's really about self-nurturance. So what are you doing that is self-loving? And so you really want to send the signals to your mind, to your soul, to your body, that you honor yourself and that you come first and that you do love yourself before anybody else. Because the only way you're going to begin to attract other people who love themselves as well is if you begin on the inside and doing these things. And what happens when you start taking care of yourself in a very self-loving way and self-nurturing way is you end up with those feelings, those emotions of love, self-love for the self, love of the self. And then this can overflow to love of others. And I really don't think that when you're in that vibration, you will continue to attract narcissists. I think this is the ceasing of that attraction, because you are no longer seeking any external validations of love. What do you think about that?
I think that's some really great points, you know, because we hear self-love so much, you know, especially in the spiritual community. It's an easy thing to say, and there's great truth to it. But the reality is that it's actually very broad, as you've kind of illuminated here. Even though it's a simple topic, it's a very, very, very broad topic, because essentially it comes down to every single facet of our lives. Are we loving or not loving? And we tend to spend more time thinking about love as an external force. I think that's because of this narcissism, that we're disconnected from the love within, and that perpetuates that same dynamic. But the reality is there's all these different layers on our own relationship with ourselves. You know, our self-talk. What kind of thoughts and things do we say to ourselves in our own mind when we're by ourselves? You know, when we make a mistake, like, oh, do we start to just punish ourselves? Or are we forgiving? Are we loving? Are we, you know, setting healthy boundaries within ourselves? Are we following those healthy protocols? Are we actively giving ourselves the things that we know we need, despite, you know, the challenges or resistance that may come up internally? So the other thing I want to mention, is important as it is, yes, self-love, but it also comes out in our relationships with others. Because if you're allowing yourself to be abused by someone, that's not a self-loving act. There's this whole martyr program out there that, like, yeah, you have to love everyone and forgive all abusers before they've even taken any accountability for their abuse, and they're not even apologizing or sorry about their abuse, right? That's dangerous, because you're just setting yourself up for more of that dynamic. Love and self-love also extend into our relationships, so that if someone is abusing you, it's a very self-loving act to say, no, I will not allow for this abuse. I'm not going to continue to participate in this relationship that is clearly now abusive. And so that kind of gets us into, I think, some of the other things that we were talking about in terms of like the actions that we can take, the practical steps that we can use to respond to narcissism consciously, because we're recognizing what we're dealing with, right? And so we can respond to the best of our ability for the best results, which I think will result in greater peace and harmony for ourselves at the very least, if not ultimately for the narcissist too, because we're holding them accountable. So I have some notes here that I'm just going to take a little look at. We had talked about self-love being the primer. I think, you know, there's a lot of different ways you mentioned them, but in the simplest sense, it's like, okay, what is it that I'm looking for in the narcissist that they're not giving me right now, that I'm attached to perhaps, that's having me stick around even in the face of abuse, right? And to recognize that, okay, maybe it's praise, maybe it's acknowledgement, maybe it's, you know, companionship, whatever, right? Just get clear on what that is. And then instead of projecting it out onto the other person or in the outside world, see how in what ways you can give that to yourself. right? That's a self-loving act, to remove the externalization of something and say, okay, how can I claim my power back on this level? So the self-love, I think, is a great place to start, but I think pretty much everything that we're going to go over today in this video is an act of self-love. So that's just, the foundational point. We had also talked about setting boundaries. So this is very important. When you're responding to a narcissist, I think setting boundaries, let's just go over the list right now, and then I think we can go more deeply into detail on each of the subjects. So all of this, remember, is self-love, but the very base self-love, right? And some expressions that you can look at as actions of self-love. 1, setting boundaries in this relationship that is now starting to express narcissistic tendencies or pathologies. 2, not being codependent, right? Which is kind of an extension of the previous one. You're setting a boundaries. This is me, this is you. I'm not going to unnecessarily or unreasonably expect you to fulfill my needs, right? It's not to say we can't be interdependent, but especially if you see that the other person is categorically not supporting you in your needs, then it might be time to set a healthier boundary, right? Not be codependent, not expect so much from them unrealistically so. 3, owning your own emotions, or also an extension of that, not exposing them to, this narcissistic dynamic, or making yourself more vulnerable, right? Because if you're starting to present yourself in a situation with some narcissistic tendencies, chances are the person isn't going to be compassionate. So you don't want to try and use your emotions to reason with them, because they're going to probably use it against you. So finally, of this, not finally, sorry, 2 more. If all of those things don't seem to work, the gray rock method is really great. And so we'll talk more about that in a second. And then finally, if all of those things are just not working, and it's possible, sometimes it's not possible to do this one, so you have to just stick with gray rock. But if none of that works and you find yourself just done, you're at your authentic limit, and or it's clear that this person is definitely expressing strong narcissistic tendencies, is to go no contact. So these are some of the basic techniques that we can use to respond to narcissism to our best ability. So Stephanie, I'm going to let you share a bit about, however much you want to share about, what we've gone over. So we can go over them from the start. So starting with setting boundaries, let's have you speak to that one.
Yeah, that's really going to be dependent on each situation. But once you realize what you're dealing with, you're going to probably want to begin distancing yourself from that person. So if they are trying to manipulate you or get you to do anything that you're not comfortable with, what it could be a range of ideas or possibilities, but where you start putting your foot down, really, whereas before you might have been a pushover or gone with the flow of the way that they wanted things, you begin to, like I said, distance yourself and set these boundaries where you begin to start saying no more, and without much explanation, stating, no, I'm not going to that party, or no, I can't see you tonight, or whatever it might be. So that's going to be up to each individual, but that's the first step, which is really tuning into yourself and asking yourself, how comfortable do I feel? If I'm not comfortable, and maybe the old you, before you really started to take take control of the situation, would have gone forward with some of these things. And so this is the idea of setting boundaries. Now, it's not really going to work with a narcissist. They usually cross boundaries. And once you've set boundaries and they start crossing them, then you know that you need to move on to some more dramatic changes in order for self-preservation and really getting away from this person. So do you have any other ideas about setting boundaries?
I think that's great. Yeah, part of it also, I think, is emotional boundaries, right? You said people, they can sometimes make you want to do something you don't feel comfortable doing, manipulating, and emotional manipulation is one of the key aspects that, is part of this system, because they often want to use the emotions to control and manipulate you, to get you to have a certain action or results that's in their best interest, right? Usually not in yours. So beware of the emotional boundaries as well. It's very important to set an emotional boundary. You might have to do some meditative work. You might have to take some time for yourself to get really clear on what it is you're feeling, what your emotions are. And that's, I think, important, however long it takes you, because if you start to take emotional responsibility for something that's not yours, it can really lead you down a rabbit hole of despair and deception. So setting emotional boundaries, I would say, is very key. Make sure that you are not being held responsible for things that aren't yours to be responsible for, particularly emotionally, because that's one of the things the narcissists love to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is about codependency, because a person who's codependent in a narcissistic relationship will tend to take ownership of the feelings that the other person has. So meaning that or feeling responsible for another's emotions, because the narcissist will use that as a manipulation, and knowing that the empath or the codependent will acquiesce because of this emotional manipulation. So becoming really strong in yourself, where no matter how the other person feels, no matter how much they cry, no matter how many tantrums they have, or how much pleading they do, or victimhood they display, that you are not going to fall for it. You are not going to feel responsible for their hurt, their pain, which is all manufactured. Some of it is authentic pain, but it's coming from a place of they're using you as an object. It's not that they love you or that they want you, it's that they need you for their survival, and not in a healthy way. And so to remove yourself from that codependent position where you're feeding the narcissist their energy, you should no longer care, for lack of a better word, about their feelings. Your feelings have become now of primary importance. They're going to use, like you said, emotional manipulation to reel you back in once they feel that you are distancing. And so be prepared for that dynamic. I know people who have told their spouse they're getting a divorce. Well, all of a sudden, the spouse, who's been a stone cold rock, not giving them the time of day for 20 years, starts crying uncontrollably for weeks on end and can't live because all of a sudden their spouse is going to leave. Well, that's emotional manipulation. It doesn't mean that that person is suddenly going to turn into another person just because they're crying. They're crying because they don't know how to live without you, not because they love you, but because they're empty on the inside and they have no sense of self. And so don't fall for it, basically. So really recognize your own codependence. Do not feel responsible for another's emotions. Don't allow yourself to be manipulated. And I think this, might lead into gray rock. I don't know if that's the next one on the list, but you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we have a little bit of just about, owning your own emotions. It's basically the extension of not being codependent, right? And not exposing those emotions or your vulnerabilities to the other person. But there is one thing I want to mention about that, and we can kind of tie it all in together, I think. It sounds almost, dispassionate or like a lack of compassion to say, stop caring, right? But ironically, that is categorically what's required, because it's the mechanism of caring that the narcissist has relied upon for the emotional manipulation and domination and control. So if you allow yourself to fall into that or fall back on that, which for any sort of codependent or empath or people who fall into those kind of categories, or self-identify or whatever, it's having too much compassion, it's caring too much, having too much feeling, and maybe not enough logic or left brain or boundaries, right? It's the boundlessness of the oneness of universal love, which I love myself and I know about, right? But that's how I know I fell into the pitfall of not having enough boundaries and saying, well, no, I don't want to be one with the narcissistic pathologies because of look at what that creates, right? So that's a choice. On some level, deeper spiritual level, yes, we are all one. And also, I can learn from the narcissist in this particular way by being a little bit less compassionate because of my own self-survival and preservation and self-love, right? And it's appropriate since you know that the narcissist is not actually offering or generating true compassion. That's what defines a narcissist, right? Or someone, cluster B personality, whatever. When someone is caught expressing narcissism, they're categorically not being compassionate, likely with you. So in a sense, not to say that, two wrongs make a right, it's not that, but just matching that energy can actually help to bring a neutrality or a balance to the situation where you say, okay, I'm going to be a little bit less compassionate. That doesn't mean that you're totally dispassionate or that you have no compassion. It just means that you have more compassion for yourself first, instead of having more compassion for the other first. Because if you're having more compassion for everyone else over yourself, eventually that will lead to your destruction and your demise. It will lead to your death because you're not operating under at least a base level healthy self-preservation, which is what we need to, survive in this world. So especially, if you find yourself in danger situations, which, narcissistic pathologies can be very dangerous. I think honestly, this is at the heart of all the dysfunction in our relationships that we see is this narcissistic mechanism. So, and people die all the time from broken hearts or, murdered by their partners and spouses, all these different things, all different expressions of the selfishness of the narcissism and, how it can express through us. So I think having those healthy emotional boundaries, you can still have compassion, but make sure you have compassion for yourself first, before anyone else. And from that place, you can offer compassion to the narcissist too, but keep those boundaries and don't make yourself vulnerable. Don't share how you feel more than necessary or more than you even feel comfortable with, because chances are it's going to be turned against you. So just going into the gray rock method now, it sounds kind of weird. Maybe it's also kind of simply stated, but gray rock is neutral, right? It's gray, it's opposed to white or black, it's a rock, it's like rocks are neutral, right? They're not active at all. So the idea is to embody this sort of spirit of a gray rock, very neutral, no emotion, almost robotic even, or narcissistic maybe in a sense of being devoid of emotion, but you're not really required to not have emotion. It's just don't express it. Don't express your emotions to someone who's most likely a narcissist or expressing narcissistic pathologies, because it's not going to go well, most likely. They're going to almost surely use the emotions against you in some form of emotional manipulation. So by staying neutral, you free yourself by not feeding the beast, so to speak. I'm going to let you say what you'd like to say about the gray rock, because I know I'm going to let you do that. I just meant to introduce them. So what do you want to share about the gray rock method?
Yeah, just one more comment about it. It's really a non-reaction. It's a no response. It's like going cold, stone cold. And the narcissist will keep pushing because they're going to keep trying, but eventually it will work. Eventually they'll give up because they're not getting fed the energy that they seek and desire, and they will move on. So the more you can do the gray rock method, the sooner you will be free of the narcissist. So is the next one no contact? Is that what we wanted to talk about?
The next one is no contact. Yeah, if all else fails, just go no contact. So the gray rock, as you mentioned, Stephanie, is a great way. It will eventually work. Chances are, they do the Hoover, right? They try and pull you back in. They try and suck you back in with emotional manipulation, gaslighting, etc., whatever. But if you disengage, like you said, you don't feed them that energy, which the energy that they feed off of usually is chaos, right? Chaos and drama and negativity. So if you stop reacting with the negativity, it gives them nothing to attach to. So they're going to eventually go look for their narcissistic supply somewhere else. Just allowing things to go cold, to cool down, to be sort of a non-issue, right, is a really effective way. It takes some practice, it takes some determination, but it will work ultimately every time, because eventually they're going to learn and see that they're not going to get their supply met from you. So they will go see someone else, seek somewhere else to get that source met. Ultimately, if they choose not to, let's say, you get a rare case, maybe highly pathological narcissist that is trying to, destroy you, trying to take you down, trying to, make your life a living hell. And that's where the no contact really comes in. Sometimes with people in our lives, let's say you're co-parenting with a narcissist, or, your child's parent is a narcissist, you probably can't go no contact because you have to have this person in your life, which is, an unfortunate situation, you might say, but it's also a great opportunity for mastery to do the whole no contact / gray rock. So sometimes you can probably not be in contact, and those times that you do have to remain in contact, you can stay as neutral as possible, not to give them anything else to feed drama into your life or your relationships, surrounding that person. So, and then sometimes, just ignoring them, even when they, are trying to destroy you. Even still, if you don't feed them the negativity back, the truth is that they don't have any of those powers that they'd like to claim over you, right? The only power they have is to make you afraid, which will then get you off your source, off your center, off your balance, off your sovereignty, and out of your self-made, self-loving boundaries. And then they can start to come in and manipulate the situation. But by staying strong in who you are, in your self-love and self-connection, and not falling into the fear-mongering, the manipulations of fear, you can keep your sovereignty even in the face of anything. And that's true mastery. So, the no contact can look, I think, a lot of different ways. But I think that's some of the basics that we can go over. And Stephanie, I'm sure you'll have lots or something to add to that.
Yeah, I think that the way that Adam and I are talking about responding to a narcissist in this video is somewhat simplistic, because there are going to be situations that are much more complicated. So if you're married to a narcissist, and after 5, 10, 20, 30 years, you realize that they're a narcissist, and you decide internally that you need to get away, the processes that we're talking about, they're going to be much more drawn out, probably, because exiting a marriage can be very complicated, especially with a narcissist. And so it's not always as simplistic as maybe the way that we're talking about it, but these tactics will still work to your benefit, and you will have to be using them along the way in your own timing and the way that you feel it works, before you really end up leaving the situation and then eventually going no contact. And like Adam said, not all situations make it possible to be fully no contact. A lot of people struggle with having one parent who is a narcissist and the other one isn't, and they would like to maintain the relationship with the non-narcissistic parent, and they would really like to go no contact with the narcissistic parent, but they decide to maintain contact in order to keep the relationship with the other parent. And so this is a very complicated situation. So we understand that there are very deep complexities to these relationships. These can take months and years to extricate yourself from, and then also to heal from. In future videos, we're going to talk about healing from narcissistic abuse, but it's all intertwined. And so it's just, we know that it's more complex than we're actually talking about, but using these techniques over time as you're moving forward in your process can be the most helpful way to remove yourself from these kinds of situations.
Yes, and thank you. Yeah, agreed. And the next video that we'll be doing is healing from narcissistic abuse and seeing its purpose or positive outcomes. So there's a lot more that we can say about this, of course. I mean, it is such a complex topic, but that doesn't change the fact, as Stephanie was saying, that the simplicity has a lot of power in it. The specific details of our own life's experience will be as varied as infinity, right? But these simple techniques can be applicable to pretty much every situation you find yourself in with a narcissist. So it's just to find out, which feels the most appropriate to you in each moment and use them accordingly. But if you use them and you continue to reuse them and practice it, just like any skill, right? It's like a muscle, you got to build it. It will become easier and easier to disentangle yourself from these narcissistic energies and do what I like to call busting the narcissism, right? At least in your own life to start. And then who knows, what we can achieve on a global scale once we free ourselves up from these crazy, literally insane manipulative energies.
Yes, yes. It's going to take each one of us to heal from within, finding that self-love, saying no to these types of relationships and dynamics with people, and then, yes, creating the world that we want from a place of love and harmony and peace. And that's really where we're headed as more and more of us awaken to these types of abusive situations and set ourselves free.
Perfectly said. I won't say any more.
Okay, so on that note, then we will say goodbye and we will see you in the next video.
Thanks again, everyone, for watching. Many blessings.
Many blessings to everyone. Bye-bye.